Hey, Jordan here, and thank you in advance for watching this. What we're about to go into are a series of artist talks as part of a series that we had launched as our form of participation for the Fall of Freedom initiative. JTR Presents is a contemporary art museum that offers design services that helps the creative community, helps the community in general, and we seek to positively impact our community and environment through art, tech, and design. So, in relation to this initiative, Fall of Freedom, it started off with 16 artists that did a call to action about 6 weeks ago. And the call was for anybody in the arts to do something, be it in their programming, a project, something for the 22nd and 21st of November of this year, as a way for us as a creative community to push back and call out the current administration and their actions against creative institutions relating to censorship, justice, community truth, and freedom of expression. This is our community's way of saying that we will not be silenced, we will not be censored, we will still continue to fight for justice for all, we'll still continue to fight for freedom for all, and we stand by our communities, especially those that are marginalized. In addition to that, we exercise our freedom of expression, we exercise our First Amendment rights in really pushing back and holding our government accountable. And so with that said, we will be moving on, and I present to you the following artists. Recording. First and foremost, thank you so very much for your time. It's an honor to get to talk to you about your work and just some of the work here related to the Fall of Freedom, which is covering topics of censorship, injustice, community truth, and freedom of expression. Sachi, Dely, is that right? Or Dely?
Dely.
Dely. Sorry about that.
You're fine.
Sachi, Dely, truly a pleasure. I'd love to learn more about your work, getting right into it. What informs your work? Because I know when we first met, I remember meeting you through your portraiture that you did for, that's currently on display at the Tanger Center. And if I'm not mistaken, that was also part of your residency at Grow Space, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember one of the takeaways was like this representation of everyday people and of indigenous people, which is often overshadowed and overlooked. And so the first thing that came to my mind was about painting truth. You paint the truth of an existence of a society that was here long before our modern one, in a culture that still exists to this day. And so I see you and I see your work in that sense. But I have a feeling your work touches on way more than just that. So what does your work, how does your work address those themes, and what else informs your work?
So my work is very much cultural based, right? So just to give some background, I am Banong, which is an indigenous group in, I would say, Southeast Asia, primarily in Vietnam, but we're also in Cambodia. So this is an indigenous ethnic group in Southeast Asia, right? I came to the US as a refugee. I am now a Benong person living in America, and I've been in the US since I was 4. So much of my adolescent life was trying to figure out who I am and like understanding my culture because I'm living in a community where my community is still growing. So I didn't grow up with a lot of resources to really learn about my history. So my work basically is a form of cultural preservation, right? My work is mostly following traditional tribal patterns. That's just my niche, my interest. You'll see it in my work a lot of the times is I'm really focused on these patterns because it holds so much of our identity, our history. And I recently became a mother as well. And one of our
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Well, not that recent. He's two now. So like it's not like I just gave birth or anything, but um so I mean the fabric itself holds so much history. For a really long time our babies were carried in um I don't know what I guess you would call it like a not a swaddle, but it's basically a baby carrier and it's a long piece of fabric, can be about 6 feet long and maybe like a foot and a half wide, but it's really just big enough to carry a child from newborn all the way to like 3 or 4. So a lot of my work is about trying to keep my culture alive, but also have it exist in American society because I know when I was younger growing up, so much of me wanted to see more representation of my community. And what did exist wasn't very good. I'll just be quite frank. I mean, you hear about the Vietnam War, but
Right.
even in American history books, they don't acknowledge the tribal people as separate from the Vietnamese population. So they kind of just categorize us into the Vietnamese population, which basically just deletes our entire existence in the history book. So
Okay.
yeah, to explain that much, that's really what my work is fueled by.
No, I really appreciate it. So you touched on it a little bit. I kind of want to talk a little bit more about community, right?
Mhm.
So you mentioned about your community growing and just in your experience, what is community to you? And what do you think is the best way to build and maintain it? Or what do you think are the ways that we build and maintain community?
Yeah, I've said this before in our panel, and I really do believe that community is love in action. And I think that community can be created and you don't have to look alike. It can be very diverse, right? I think sometimes people think community has to be people that are exactly like you, sort of, kind of. I mean, you guys are working towards the same thing, but it's really support. It's really showing up for each other and being that love.
I think that that's poignant to point out the unifying thing that ties us together as community is that again that act of love, that act of support, more so than even our shared beliefs or
Mhm.
anything else. Because to your point, I think there are some communities where there's like a level of homogeny in
Mhm.
both appearance or mindset or action, and I think sometimes that can be mistaken as community.
Mhm.
Um, where that's really just an attribute is what I'm understanding. So I like that underlying thread instead of it being like shared values, it's just this shared willingness to care about each other. I feel like it's important to make that distinction. It also was really fun, and I'm glad you agreed to be a part of this because that was a really fun conversation we had about William H. Johnson, and I think it resonates with the themes of freedom that we had talked about there at the Weatherspoon.
Mhm.
I think there while we were there, I think I mentioned in low key semi dared institutions to like really show more actions in not just resisting against systematic problems that affect the people, but also to like promote change within the arts. So we'll tap on that a little bit, but in the topic of resistance, what do you think resistance looks like in our creative industries and in your creative practice?
It's a good question. Resistance can look like a lot of things. I mean, just saying no is resistance, but I think when it comes to like resistance in art is kind of like not selling yourself to the art world. I think it's about being uncomfortable, or I don't want to be like make other people uncomfortable because that's not necessarily what I'm trying to say, but I think resistance in art is like being authentic. I think authenticity is a form of resistance because I think society really tries to mold you and put you in a box. And even though we're inspired by other artists, which is a great thing, I think authenticity is a form of resistance. You know, people want to see different ways to resist, right? And you see it in art all the time. Um, People do, I guess, like, what is it when performance art? You see resistance in performance art a lot of the times, and you could see it.
Yeah.
I think performance art can get really into, like, I feel like that's like maybe the more extreme side of art that can get into resistance because you see people like really put themselves, make them the object, the art piece, and put themselves in very uncomfortable situations just to make a point, right? Um,
Yeah.
and in a sense, that's very authentic to
You
me.
know, I was having a conversation with another artist about like the music industry in a way, how artists kind of resist in subtle and not so subtle ways.
Hmm.
So, one example was like Lil Wayne, and some of the songs that fit the rap stereotype, and I remember this because I used to have to like defend hip hop to my non-hip hop appreciating peers. And, with my understanding with Lil Wayne, he would sneak some like poignant things in his work.
Hmm.
Or even Fonte from Little Brother, who's like here from Greensboro or Lexington,
Hmm.
I think. It would be poetry that there was like put into some of their songs in an album. And there's like a couple of songs that talk about, having gold chains or whatever, but that's just to kind of fit the quota because the people
Hmm.
at record labels or in the business of music would try to influence artists to be a certain way. A
Yes.
more Yeah, a more direct example is like Lady Gaga. Like one of the things I remember about Lady Gaga, she would dress in the weirdest things. And then when her documentary came out on Netflix, she was talking about like, producers were trying to get her to do the whole sex sells and look sexy. And she's like, I don't want to be half naked in front of a bunch of strangers. If I do, give me a meat suit or a meat necklace. And that was like her way of pushing back at these
Hmm.
sort of narratives and perceptions that folks wanted to put on her to make money. I mean, to me, those are like like different examples. So, like tying it back to the fine arts, what I'm hearing from you is like staying in that authentic self. Sometimes that can be subtle, sometimes it can be extreme, but
Hmm.
really tapping into that authenticity is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
Hmm. And I see the same thing in the music industry too. I think about like the pop girlies and how they're like super over sexualized, but it's like the same thing in a different format. And they're young though. And I think like later on in life when they have more control over what they can produce, things will change. So, and they can be more authentic because yeah, I see it too.
And that's just within the arts, right? So when we talk about art and community and the overlap of that, I think about how do we participate more in the changes that we're fighting for? So the first things that come to mind is, of course, protest if you can, if it's safe for you to do so, and also donate if you have access to wealth like that. But outside of that, or for those who don't have that, or it's not safe to protest, how else can us creatives participate in these movements for social change?
Okay. I work in the nonprofit world and very much like you know, volunteering is a great thing to do. It's you're in it, you're meeting the people, you're doing the actual work. I think a lot of people, you know, don't realize how much of impact volunteering can make, especially when you're going outside of your box, meeting different people, doing a different type of work that you've never done before, whether that be a food drive or the homeless shelter or just volunteering at a nonprofit. I think volunteering is a great way to make an impact. I think volunteers at nonprofits are the frontline people who are making that change. And it's a very underestimated way too. I know not everyone can give their time like they want. Um, I think for those who, you don't have to do it all the time, but if you can give a little bit of time every once in a while to experience working with people who maybe are, less fortunate than you or face different type of situations than you. Volunteering is a great way to kind of see that firsthand, and be there to really support them.
No, thank you for reminding me of that because like I think that to your point, I think it is underestimated in many ways. Like I was just thinking about my first experience with, community organizing was I was part of this grassroots organization that was like doing phone calls to people throughout Greensboro to make sure people were registered to vote, see if anyone needed like special transportation or access to the polls. And this was all during like Obama's first run for the presidency.
Mhm.
Um, and to your point, like I like to think that that grassroots work led to him winning and to some push for the eventual changes we were looking for, particularly with healthcare being affordable. So I thank you for kind of bringing that back, and it doesn't always have to be what we contribute doesn't always have to be a big deal. It can be the small things too that
Mhm.
generate some real momentum is what I'm being reminded of right now.
Yeah, it's the little things that make a big impact. And if we have a lot of people doing little things, we make a big impact. I mean, that's really what you want to do at the end of the day is, it may not feel like a lot at the moment, but when you realize like you made someone's day, that's great. That's something like, you could have just done something else and not have to help this person out, but you might have made their day and really did something good there.
No, that's fair. And I think about oftentimes with stuff like this, I think about the issue of scale.
Hmm.
So I feel like this conversation, we're talking about the individual, right? And in the individual in the sort of greater community, like one's neighborhood, one's area, one city, maybe. So a part of me thinks about scale from an institutional level. So you say you work at a nonprofit. And you
Hmm.
mentioned before that sometimes institutions saying no to certain things can be a form of resistance. So I'd like to kind of circle back to that, right? And the question that I have is, how do we amplify the role of art and design in the fight for freedom and changes that we seek to make?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? Because my dogs are
Yeah.
kind of barking in my ear a little bit. But
No worries. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, how do we amplify the role of art and design in the fight for freedom and changes that we seek to make? And I'm asking this a little bit from the institutional side. I know you tapped in on it before.
well, I think art goes a long way as far as like, I mean, even a logo representing an institution that's really fighting for something makes a big impact because then that logo gets recognized, right? There's something like that. And then there's also if institutions invested in art and artists that spread a message. Because, okay, one thing is that sometimes like people can't understand a message when you say it, but for some reason, when they look at it as a picture and there's emotion in it, it makes sense to them. Sometimes words can't explain things as good as art can. And I think institutions should take advantage of that. And, it's like you could say all these things, you could put all these things out, but art hits a different string in the heart. Um, I hope that answers your question. That one was a little hard.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time, so I did not want to waste it asking dumb questions. But no, but no, jokes aside, like I hope one of the things I hope for from these kind of discussions is that not only that inspires people to take action, but it helps provide, again, some focus. Because I think the arts has a track record and a really strong ability to hold space for these kind of conversations to happen, especially amongst people like change makers and people that will actually do the action.
Hmm.
And I think the art itself sets the conversation, facilitates it, helps set the
Hmm.
focus, if you will. So I saw this when I was at Alliance Theater and like our rendition of the play Disgrace influenced the leaders from the Jewish and Muslim communities to hold like a town hall meeting at our theater, where and it kind of ran like a peace talk, if you will, talking about the play at first and the themes that it touched on, and
Mhm.
then from there trying to translate it to real life issues that both communities were experiencing, and
Mhm.
then from there how do we build better relationships, and or and I saw it again at the Mint Museum after Keith Lamont Scott's murder, a year after that incident. The museum like held space by like offering their auditorium for those neighborhoods and the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department to kind of sit and do their peace talks and sort of
Mhm.
hash out how can we have a better relationship.
Right.
So to me, I feel like those are clues. Now, what happened afterwards, I have no idea. I think we could do a better job tracking what happens after. But I feel like these are major clues. And again, from an
Mhm.
institutional level, I think it would be easier to kind of, institutions have the power to hold those spaces and definitely have the artwork to facilitate that conversation. And I think us as artists um, have the ability, again, creating those pieces as which
Mhm.
leads to my next question. As image makers, and this touches a little bit, I think, to what we discussed during the Fighters of Freedom was, you know, what can be the personal and political implications of what we make? And the follow-up question is, what do you think the responsibility of the creative is, assuming we have any?
Mhm. So as artists, I think we always have this political implication, right? When we're creating, and it's something we have to think about as we're creating whether or not the piece is meant to be political or not, because at the end of the day, other people might view it differently. And that's our responsibility to make sure when we are creating these pieces that I'm trying to remember what I said at the panel, but I can't really. What did I say? I said these, okay, I said our responsibility as artists is to recognize that we have political implications and to choose wisely after that and to kind of tread, I wouldn't say lightly, but to tread with intention and just have that awareness that things can get taken a certain way. Um, that's not exactly what I said, but that's to summarize it.
That
Yeah.
sounds familiar. That sounds familiar because I think my takeaway from that was, like you said, we're operate with intention and make sure that's clear,
Mm-hmm.
but how that goes after, just be aware.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate and on the mark. And I think about that question because like that's actually from one of my mentors. I don't know if you know Roy Carter, but
I don't think so.
he's the director of the arts program at A&T. And yeah, when I was there, I took him as my mentor. And he graciously accepted.
Mhm.
And so, one of the things he would drill into our heads as artists and designers, he was like, everything you make will have consequences. And so for you as a creative, as an image maker, you need to think about that and think through that. And so that stuck with me. And that always took that, even with the work that I do today, I still think about like, okay, who will this affect and in what context? And am I okay
Mhm.
with that? And so I feel like that's a poignant sort of conversation, or even just what we're having now, right?
Mhm.
Like the whole issue with Harry Potter and what's her name? J.K.
Emma.
Rowling.
Oh, J. Carroll. Yeah, I saw that. No, but how was introduced to that was, what is it? X that used to be Twitter. She had like
Yeah,
tweeted
yeah, all those
something.
Twitter posts. Yeah.
Yeah, I had seen that, and yeah, I saw that. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or even bring it more recently, right? With Charlie Kirk,
Mm-hmm.
like everyone, say what you will. My takeaway from all of that was, there are implications, sure, in law, but also just in nature for the things you do and say. What you do and say is going to ripple out into the world, and whoever or whatever it hits is going to ripple back to you in some form or another. And that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of the lesson I learned from all of that. So I was thinking rhetorically, like, what, to your point, what intentions do I want to ripple out and that I hope ripples back?
Yeah,
And am I ready to own whatever ripples back?
no,
It's,
definitely. And I think for me personally, I've always had to somewhat put a filter on when I talk about certain things or about my culture or my community, because I know that not everyone will perceive it the same way I do, right? And I mean, even where I work at now, it's a nonpartisan nonprofit, but we even have implications of what we say or who we're connected to. So I've always felt like I have to keep somewhat of a filter of awareness so that I don't make the mistake of the ripple coming back as a wave, as a tsunami, essentially. Because there's a lot of
oh,
political
that's
things that are
interesting.
happening in Vietnam and with my community, and even the art I produce or the attention that I get on like media. I have to be careful because I don't want that affecting and rippling to my relatives in Vietnam and that, hurting them. Even if I'm just feeling like a little ripple, they might feel a wave. So it's the people that we're connected to as well and who we're representing. So that's really important. That's why we
And I
have to
think,
be careful.
yeah, I think this ties back to what you were saying before about this act of love or this act of support being the main ingredient of a community. Forgive me, I'm paraphrasing. I kind of want to talk a little bit about your work a bit more because I feel like there's some resonance in that. Um, before we get to like the last question that I have, because
Hmm.
I think what you're talking about is relating to privilege and really relating to access in a way.
Hmm.
And so before we get to that question, about your work and what I know you've told me before what inspired it, and I kind of wanted to revisit that. Like, what inspired you to do this work for cultural preservation, to do this work for promoting more accurate representation of a community? I think there's something important in that to
Hmm.
expand on.
Yeah. So in Vietnam, where my indigenous community exists, along with other tribes too, it's very hard to get certain things in what well, before I answer, is this going to be posted on like something or like is this a podcast?
Somewhat, yeah. This is gonna be
Okay.
posted on YouTube as like a feature series of other interviews with other artists with the same questions.
Okay. No, that's fine. So in my home country, it's very hard for people to get access to education. They make it very difficult. I'm a believer that education is very important. If you're knowledgeable, then you're less likely to be controlled. I think personally for me, I am privileged because despite the things that happen in America and some political things I might not agree with, America is a free country. And I am lucky to be able to paint and to say things and to speak freely without being persecuted. Unfortunately, that's not the same for people who are in my home country. And because I know that, and because I do have the privilege to create art and to say something, not literally, I mean, sometimes say something, but most of the time I prefer to create something that says something. And for me, the art that I produce is to preserve culture because to me that is an act of resistance because my culture has very much been through uh, ethnic cleanse, attempted genocides, a lot of things, right? So my will to live and to create is resistance. And it's very important that my work lives beyond me so that for the sake of my community and that we still exist, some way, shape, or form. So when I make my art, it's not, it's yes, it's to preserve culture and to show the next generation of youth have something that they can relate to, but it's also to mark that we exist before anything is erased, you know? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That resonates a little bit with me. There's something similar with the LGBT community, and it was something while I was advocating for the trans community with transparency. My co-curator, who's a trans woman named Laura Americo, she's also Indigenous. She had mentioned before one of the things she would say regularly was that we were always here.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where that was kind of her that is kind of her banner when we talk about trans identity and representation. She's like, we've always been here from ancient times to now, and we'll always will be here so long as there's humanity. And it
Hmm.
sounds like there's a similar your mark it sounds like you're carrying a similar banner for your
Hmm.
community, for your culture, for your heritage, um, and that you're using that privilege and platform and access to promote that for others. And
Yeah.
that's beautifully said. I think that in a way answers without answering the question. Well, it answers the questions without me asking the question of
Hmm.
the last one, which is, you know, are we obligated to leverage our access and privilege to advocate for these changes? If so, how? And if not, why?
So personally, I feel I'm obligated. I know not everyone feels the same way. And I think that question really depends on the person. I would like most people to feel like they should try to do better for the sake of the community, for humanity, but it's not something I would force. But if I'm just gonna answer that about myself, I do feel obligated just because my background, I know what privilege and access I have. And I also know that the current community that exists, my current community that I'm around and exists, they're not as interested in preserving the culture or our history as much as I am. In fact, it feels like not a lot of people are, except for the ones that are dying out. And for me, it feels like if there's one person that can, what is it, carry the basket and then pass it down to someone else later on, then that's the line of survival. So for me, I do feel obligated. But for others, I don't know. I mean, I think it varies.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And I asked that question with the intention of learning more about where you're coming from and it because I think we did have that conversation in our group. That's the last that question I actually took from our group question.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah,
I noticed some of these were very similar. I was like
yeah.
very familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, the last two was intentionally from that because I think those were very important questions that I think we should have more. I think generally speaking, we should have more conversations around.
Hmm.
Because it just seems needed in this time given recent events.
Hmm.
But I really liked you and I think it was Karen's like argument about that question in particular about leveraging your platform and access to advocate for others.
Hmm.
And I ask that because I still think it's interesting. Like you said, it depends on the individual, and I feel like there's clues to that.
Hmm.
And what you answered made sense, especially for how you mentioned about how you advocate for your community using your platform, using free speech, be raising even through this recorded conversation, right? That's going to
Hmm.
share that awareness of your community and what we do have access to, what privileges we have access to,
Hmm.
and what's worth fighting for. And so,
Hmm.
and with that, I sincerely appreciate what you do. Um, I guess my last thoughts is and I feel like I skipped a question. I did actually skip a question, I think. I think about how do we how do we collectively build a better relationship with each other, like as a community?
Um, I think to build a better relationship with each other is being open to learning about each other. I think it's about being open to kind of the willingness to get to know each other too. You got to be willing to want to be part of a community, and you have to kind of be, there's a saying, it's like uh to be part of the village, you have to be a villager, right? Essentially meaning that if you want the support of the community, you also have to support the members of the community too. And then that love, that action comes back to you, right? And I think that if more people understood that coming together isn't, if more people understood that coming together as a community means really showing up and being that villager and having moments of being uncomfortable for the sake of later on making a bigger impact, then I think I'm like losing my train of thought. What was the question? I'm so
No, no,
sorry.
I was just no, no, no. It's fine. It's fine. I was just thinking, do we, how do we have a better relationship with each other as a community?
Oh,
I
okay,
think was the
okay.
shorter version of the question.
Oh, okay, okay. Um, to have a better relationship with each other as a community, I think it's important that we have to be uncomfortable and really show up for one another, even when we don't feel like doing it. You know what I mean? I think like when you are part of a community, sometimes you don't want to do things. Sometimes you would rather stay home and not have to go to this event. But when you are a community member, you show up, you show up and be supportive even when you don't feel like it. And that's that little bit of uncomfortableness because later on when you have something, your community will show up for you. And I think that that's really one of the things about community that people don't like is that you have to show up, but that's part of it. Support comes to you when you show it back to them, or show it back to whoever.
That makes sense. It reminds me of a saying I used to hear about, showing up's half the battle.
Hmm.
And I'm realizing more and more how true that is. So, on that note, I mean, thank you for showing up for this. It really means a lot. As I'm just kind of processing this conversation and just trying to see how this all ties in, the biggest takeaway I'm having right now is like this sensitivity to how we're all connected, how our actions ripple off of each other, and to be walk with the intention on whether we want those ripples to just stay ripples or turn into a tsunami, and for who. And regardless of the intention, be present and aware and own what comes of it.
Hmm.
um, and just when it comes to you and your work, how that shows up to you is in leveraging your platform to advocate and raise awareness of the culture that you come from, that the cultural heritage that you come from, leveraging the privileges you have access to, and raising awareness of the issues that are at hand. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, I think that's a pretty accurate summary.
Well, then I look forward to seeing more, and I'd be honored if I can contribute to in any way, shape, or form to that. And again, I'm happy to keep doing work with you, and thank you for this privilege.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you for your questions. That was great. That was fun.
Absolutely. And okay, okay. I kind of want to lean on a couple more topics here, right? With injustice, with community, with One second. Good thing we're editing this out.
Good thing it's not live.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do recording.
Yeah.
All right. Cut two in three, two, one. Okay. So I wanted to lean on some other topics and zoom out for a second. So we had talked about, a lot of community, a lot of freedom of expressions, your platform, and a little bit of truth telling. And I kind of want to lean more on truth telling and justice. Um, so the first question, in going back to how your creative practice is really more a work of cultural preservation, what truths do you aim to tell through that cultural work?
So for my work, I think a lot of the truths I try to tell in the work is the lies I told myself when I was younger. So looking at myself from a younger lens where I didn't really understand my culture and also didn't really have an interest in learning about my culture, I kind of
Yeah.
had this perception of where I came from that, to be quite frank, was pretty ugly to kind of, if I think about it now as an adult, I used to kind of not really appreciate my culture. I didn't really like any aspect of it when I was growing up. Like I had a really hard time connecting to it only because I was trying so hard to assimilate to American culture that I rejected my own. And I felt for some reason as a kid that I couldn't balance two or I couldn't combine it. I just completely wanted to assimilate completely to American culture, just be American and just leave that side of who I was culturally, who my parents were, who, my ancestors were. And maybe that was a trauma response too, right? I mean, I came to the US not in the safest way. We walked from Vietnam to Cambodia, stayed at two refugee camps, and then later took a plane here to the US. And this is all through early developmental stages. And I think part of me wanted to forget that trauma and associating, and I was for some reason associating my culture with the trauma, right? Um, but now as an adult, the truth I want to tell is the truth I should have known. Like someone should have taught me as a child. Not to say my parents didn't try, but because I was like assimilating so hard to American culture, there kind of became uh, a language barrier between us, kind of like a language gap, because I was catching on to English much faster than they were, and to the point where I was just speaking English all the time because I wanted to be fully American. Um, the truth I want to tell in my art to my younger self is to really appreciate and see the beauty in the culture and see that two things can exist in one, and that the history is rich, that the thing that you're not ugly, and that your skin, the clothes you wear, the way your house smells, the food you eat is not ugly. It doesn't stink, and you don't have to fit in so hard. So that would be my main truth. If I was to say the foundation of my work, it starts there. It starts with my childhood and kind of just undoing all of that.
And if I may say, I know I've known you for a very short amount of time. If I may say, I do see a beauty in your work, in you as a person, and in this narrative. And I'm really honored with you sharing that. I think there is, in what you speak of, right, that cultural trauma and in a little bit of the trauma of knowing the complexity of one's history. I I understand that through my own cultural context in learning about America's complicated, we'll say complicated relationship with Black people, that we're still facing to this day, right? Like there's still debate over what gets taught in schools around that specific kind of history, let alone histories of so many others, because it's not just
Mhm.
us.
Mm.
And there is a sort of trauma in accessing that knowledge, but also an importance. And so I think there's a beauty in also trying to find reconciliation in it. And it sounds like the work that you're doing in a way is also finding justice for yourself and others. And
Mhm.
so that kind of makes me think about the next question I have about what does justice look like in your cultural preservation work?
I think justice is complex when it comes to how it can be, how it can manifest in, my community and everything that goes on. Because I think if I look to my older community members, like our elders, justice for them would be like getting our land back and this and that, right? But we're so beyond that, there's a whole population that exists now here in America. It's kind of we're starting over, but we're building stronger with a better foundation. And I think for me, and for my age group, maybe. Well, let me just talk for myself because I don't want to represent my entire age group. But I think justice for my community is being able to live freely and having, the privilege to be able to live freely and to not have as many barriers as our ancestors have. Um, I think that justice shows up in different ways. I mean, do I think we fully have gotten reparations? No, not really. But I think if we make the effort and keep going, it'll get there eventually. I don't really, I think like to be alive and to still be here despite everything that we've been through, that shows our resilience. And that's somewhat justice for me. Um, I don't I don't know exactly what I'm looking for justice wise. I don't. I'll be quite honest. Because I
That's
think
fair.
yeah, because I think like I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to understand what is justice for my community now. I'm in different generations. My elders wanted land back and this and that, but it's like I grew up in a totally different upbringing than them. I'm in a different country. The culture is different. So what would justice look like here for me in this environment? So I don't know, honestly.
And I don't think you're alone in that, right? Like, I think about, what does reparations look like for me? And while 40 acres of the mule sounds nice, wiping my student loans entirely would be better. You
I
know,
feel
know what I
that.
mean?
Oh, yeah.
So, to your point, right? Different generations, also just different individuals. Like, I even think within our generations, I'm assuming we're the same generation, but even
I think
within,
so.
yeah, because you're a millennial, right?
I'm like a zillennial. It's like I'm right at
Okay.
the cusp. I'm
T-
98, so
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'm 91, so close enough.
okay,
I know what you mean.
close enough. Hmm.
But yeah, no, but I think, yeah, that it's tricky. That justice part, like you said, it is tricky because it's going to be everyone's going to have different needs, going to relate to that. Um, but I also think some of that communal work kind of gives us insight on what is feasible, what can we fight for, or what makes the most sense. But yeah, no, I'm very intrigued to see more of the work that you make in that regard. Um, the biggest takeaway that comes from me is this need for us to remain free. And I think I see that because, like, again, even with cultural identity, I think about that with not just my blackness, but other cultures I may be tied to. I'm partly indigenous. We're looking more in detail to that. We're more likely, my family and I are more likely Maharan or Halawat and so
Ooh.
I think for me, part of that justice, and like you said, I think part of that freedom is also like the freedom to access the cultures you may be tied to,
Hmm.
or at least have access to start building that relationship. And so that's why I'm again, that's more of my anecdotal viewpoint, but like I know for me that's one way of justice. And it sounds
Mhm.
like that resonates with what you're saying about that freedom for the individual.
Mhm.
And but all right.
Okay. Oh, wait.
Thank you so much for watching. That was such a fun conversation. Before we go, I want to update you on a few things. First of all, JTR Presents just launched an artist resource map. This map is intended to centralize information regarding the resources. That can be equipment, venue spaces, exhibition spaces, residency programs, or other funding for artists to continue their creative practice and for our voices to still be heard and our stories to still be told. Secondly, there are other resources relating to voting. Your representation and your voice does matter, especially in the upcoming elections. You can find more information somewhere around this video. It's probably at the bottom in the description, but please, please, please get out and vote and make sure you're represented. Third, please donate to your local artist organizations or any art organizations that resonate with you. A lot of times us artists and creatives rely on organizations like the National Endowment of the Arts or our regional or art council that often offer funding for our programs or funding for programs for other organizations or offer funding for us artists to continue our work through residencies or just giving us the money directly. So donate to those institutions so they can continue to empower us to do the work that we're doing. And then lastly, I just want to let you know that your life, your voice, and your money matter, and they make a big difference, even if it's something small. Thank you again. Hope to see you soon.